are back to talk about protein part 2, and we're going to talk about recommendations for how much protein you should eat every day, sources of protein that you should try to include in your diet. We'll answer questions about whether you can be a healthy vegetarian or vegan in terms of getting enough protein, whether you should do that, and we will talk about protein quality and digestibility. Are you ready to learn even more about protein? Yes. Okay, let's go. Okay, so let's talk about protein recommendations. We've already talked about one protein recommendation earlier, way back at the beginning of the class when we talked about the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges, or the AMDRs. So the AMDR for protein is that you should be getting 10 to 35% of your calories from protein. And that is a guideline if you know how many calories you're eating every day and you can do all the math. We'll do some math problems to demonstrate how you can figure out if you're falling within that range. There's also computer programs you can use that will tell you that. But another way to calculate your protein needs is to use a grams per kilogram guideline. So the guideline for protein intake is that we get 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Let's use me as an example, and I'll show you what that would look like in a math problem for me.
So if we want to calculate how many grams of protein someone would eat per day, we need to have 3 facts in front of our mind. The first is the protein guideline, which is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Fact 1. Fact 2 is we need to know what weight the person is that we are looking at. So if this person is 135 pounds, I think that's about how much I weigh. Honestly, I haven't stepped on a scale in 20 years, a very long time. So I don't really know, but we'll say 135. And then we need to know that there are 2.2 pounds in a kilogram, because the protein recommendation is in kilograms, but most Americans weigh themselves in pounds. In order to convert pounds to kilograms, you just divide the amount of pounds you are by 2.2. So those are our 3 facts. Okay, so then how many grams of protein does a 135 pound person need per day? Again, we have the protein guideline, that's 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. Then we have our 135 pound person. If we divide 135 by 2.2, we get the number of kilograms that person is. So this person is 61.4 kilograms. And then we can take the protein guideline, 0.8 grams per kilogram, and we have 61.4 kilograms to account for. So we do 0.8 times 61.4. I should be eating 49.1 grams of protein per day to meet my recs.
So you know I should be eating 49 grams of protein per day. But the next question is, am I making that? Am I meeting that? And so to show you if that's true, I chronicled what I ate every day. Well, I chronicled what I ate for one day, and I looked up how much protein was eaten in each of those foods, and now you can see a day in my protein intake life.
All right, a day in my protein life. I start out every day by eating a banana, which has 1.3 grams of protein. Then I do a workout. I can't really work out anymore on a full stomach, so that's why I have a banana to get me going, and then I just kind of persist through till breakfast. Then I have breakfast. My husband thinks it's super weird, but I really like it. It's oatmeal with some cinnamon and maple syrup combined with some cereal toppers and milk, and that has 17 grams of protein, which might be more than you would think from oatmeal and cereal, but they contribute quite a bit of protein because they're whole grains, the cereal that I was eating and the oatmeal. Then in the middle of the morning, I have a snack. I usually have Greek yogurt. This day I had it with fruit and maple syrup. And Greek yogurt has a ton of protein, so 17 grams of protein in just a bit of Greek yogurt, which is awesome. And I don't always have fruit in it, but since fruit is so good right now when I'm making this video, fruit. Then for lunch, I ended up having basically a pasta salad bowl. So we had some pasta salad with whole wheat pasta left over from the night before. So I threw that in a bowl with lettuce, pickled cucumbers I'd made, avocado, some feta cheese, corn that was left over, pistachios, basically like the kitchen sink went in that bowl, some pine nuts, and it ended up being about 18 grams of protein. I mean, this is all like, we're basically guessing because this is such a menagerie of things, but probably about 18 grams of protein. Public service announcement that whole wheat pasta, which was what's in this bowl, has quite a bit of protein. So people talk about quinoa as a protein-rich grain. Whole wheat pasta has pretty much just as much as quinoa. Then I have a fruit salad with lunch. Just peaches, blueberries, strawberries, watermelon in this one. Not very much protein, but lots of yummy summer goodness. And then I felt like a little chocolate after lunch. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And I had 2 squares of this dark chocolate. One was mint, one was salted peanuts. So my kind of lunchtime ended up being almost 20 grams, well, exactly 20 grams of protein. And then in the afternoon, I had a snack. I had some pretzels and tortilla chips with hummus and tzatziki, roughly 6.5 grams of protein. I had a hard time estimating portion size on that one because I just kind of like eat until I'm full. So I did my best. Then I had a handful of pistachios later in the afternoon, 3 grams of protein, and I didn't really cook an elaborate dinner, but what I did make was 2 eggs on whole grain toast with guacamole, basil, and tomato, and that's 17 grams of protein, mostly from the eggs, but also from the whole grain toast. So what did my daily protein come out to be? 83 grams of protein, which means that I far exceeded the 49 grams of protein that were recommended for me. Woo, woo, woo. Also important to point out that I wasn't even really trying to get more protein, right? Like I was just eating normal foods. I didn't even eat any meat this day. This was basically a vegetarian day. It wasn't a vegan day, but it was vegetarian. So I wasn't even eating the biggest sources of protein, meat, and I was getting almost double the amount of protein that I need. So it's really, if you're eating like whole grains and a mix of legumes and eggs and milk and yogurt, you're going to get enough protein.
There are some situations where you might end up eating more than the 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein, or you might be recommended to up your protein intake. So if I was an athlete, I might be told to eat 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram. And so for me, instead of having to meet 49 grams of protein every day, I would be shooting to eat 74 to 104 grams of protein.
So this is a calculation for someone that's 135 pounds but is an athlete. So that person is going to follow a different protein guideline of 1.2 to 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. So the same 135 pound person, again, we just divide by 2.2 to get their weight in kilograms. So they still weigh 61.4 kilograms. And then we can do 1.2 grams per kilogram times 61.4 kilograms. And we get that this person should eat 73.7 grams of protein per day on the lower end. Or if we take 1.7 grams per kilogram times 61.4 kilograms, we get that the person should be eating 104.4 grams of protein per day. And that's compared to the 49 grams that we got with the 0.8 grams per kilogram. So athletes have to eat a bit more protein every day.
Then also, if you are sick, a dietitian might recommend that you increase your protein intake to try to help your body have a really strong immune system, not break down body proteins. And especially for people who aren't eating that much because they're not feeling that good, it can be important to make a lot of those calories protein calories so that you spare your muscle proteins and you maintain as much strength through your illness as you can, along with, of course, having antibodies and all the protein structural materials we need to fight off disease. So that's another reason that a dietitian might increase the amount of protein that somebody's eating if they're not feeling very good. But bring this back. The recommendation for healthy adults is 0.8 grams per kilogram, and almost everyone in America, if they're eating a varied diet, is going to easily meet that protein recommendation. You might be wondering what protein recommendations are based on, and they're really based upon something called nitrogen balance. So remember back to our last video on protein structure, proteins have nitrogen. They're the only compound we eat that contain a lot of nitrogen. And in our body, we try to maintain nitrogen balance. And this just means that we have equal amount of nitrogen coming in as we're using or getting rid of in our urine. We get rid of excess nitrogen through our urine. So for nitrogen balance, because protein is the only food that we get nitrogen from, we want to be intaking enough amino acids, enough protein to balance out the nitrogen needs of our body. So that's where the recommendations for protein come from, to try to help us maintain nitrogen balance. And there are different phases of your life when you're going to be in perhaps positive or negative nitrogen balance. So I'm going to show you a few examples of each of those.
When we are adults living a normal life, we want to be in nitrogen balance. So we have equal amount of nitrogen coming in as going out. But there are certain times when we are either in positive balance or negative balance. Let's start with negative balance. Negative nitrogen balance means that you have more nitrogen that you're excreting that's going out than nitrogen that you're intaking or eating. And times when you might be in negative nitrogen balance are when you're sick, when you have an illness or an injury, or if you're an astronaut in space, you can be in negative balance. So this just means that you're losing more nitrogen than you're taking in, and you don't want to maintain this state for a prolonged period of time, or your body proteins can start to be compromised, the synthesis of them. So that's negative balance. We can also be in positive nitrogen balance, and that's when we have more nitrogen coming in than nitrogen going out. So we're taking in more nitrogen than we're excreting. And positive nitrogen balance would happen if you were weightlifting and really building a lot of muscle, so exercising heavily. If you're pregnant, you need a lot of nitrogen and you're going to use all of that because you're building a whole new person. And also growing children will be in positive nitrogen balance because they're growing. So in all three of these positive examples, you're basically growing. So you're either growing your muscles, you're growing as a child, or you're a growing pregnant person, growing a human. So that's positive balance. But normally, if we are just going about our normal business, we're trying to be in nitrogen balance. So we don't have to worry too much about nitrogen balance consciously. Our bodies will regulate it for us as long as we're providing our body with a good amount of protein. So we're meeting protein recommendations and we are eating enough calories. When you're trying to be in positive balance, you'll just increase your protein a little bit to support the growing that you're trying to do.
Protein, we want to be eating proteins of high quality, and quality really means two things in relation to proteins. One is the content of the amino acids in the protein, and two is the digestibility of the protein. Let's talk about amino acid content first. Amino acid content means which amino acids make up the protein in the food. When we're talking about the content of amino acids in protein, we're really thinking about whether they have all the essential amino acids. Because remember, the essential amino acids are the amino acids that we cannot make. So if we don't have enough of essential amino acids, we're going to start to break down our muscles, basically our body proteins, to try to get enough essential amino acids. Because remember, with protein translation, the genes are calling for certain amino acids to form a protein, and if you don't have like one of those amino acids, you can't make the protein. And some protein we really need to make, like blood proteins. So you're going to break down some muscles to get those essential amino acids so that you can make that essential protein, unless you're intaking them. So we want to be eating foods that are going to give us the full complement of essential amino acids so that we're not limited in the proteins that we can produce. Well, how do we know what amino acids are in foods? That's a great question because it's pretty much impossible to know. A food label does not list out the amino acids present in the protein in that food. So we really have to rely upon the fact that most Americans are going to get plenty of the essential amino acids by just eating a normal diet. It's really only an issue when food is scarce and you're not eating enough food overall. Another thing that kind of goes with amino acid content in foods is that we can kind of puzzle piece together the foods we eat to give us the full complement of essential amino acids. This is called eating complementary proteins. how does this work? I mean, it basically works like a puzzle piece. So if each of the essential amino acids are a piece of the puzzle, we want to be eating foods that are going to give us those pieces. But you could have one food that gives you like half the essential amino acids, but it's missing the second half, and another food that has that second half but doesn't have the first half. And so those foods would be called complementary proteins. If you eat both of them together, you've got all the amino acids. The classic example of them, that is rice and beans. Or grain foods and legumes. And they are just a classic pairing of complementary proteins because they are each missing certain essential amino acids. So by themselves, you wouldn't get the full complement. But if you eat them together in a meal, you're going to get all the essential amino acids you need. So this is the good thing about eating meals, is that you're usually eating more than one food, and you're likely then to get all the amino acids you need. It also speaks really highly of traditional cultural preparations of certain foods, because rice and beans have been a popular pairing in Mexico, Latin America, Hispanic culture for so long, and there's like logic to that. So maybe we should pay attention, because it's such a great way to get all your amino acids. Protein digestibility just means that certain proteins are more digestible than others, so you're going to be able to get more of the amino acids from them. In general, animal proteins are more digestible than plant proteins, but plant proteins, you can still get much of the protein from them. It's just that animals are a little bit more digestible. What's going to happen if you don't eat enough protein, or you don't eat enough high quality protein? You don't have all the amino acids, it's not that digestible. Well, kind of three things can happen. The first thing is that your body is going to slow down protein synthesis. So you're just going to stop making a lot of the proteins. You'll make like the essentials and you'll just slow down the rest. Not ideal. The second thing that could happen is that you will break down muscle protein to try to get all the amino acids you need to make other proteins. This isn't helpful, especially if you're trying to build strength or like be a better athlete. In this case, you really need to be eating enough calories and enough energy that you can build up your muscle structures instead of using muscles to make other proteins. So sometimes athletes make what I think is a pretty nasty mistake, where they try to lose weight, so they really restrict their calorie intake, and that is not usually going to help you become a better athlete, because you're going to start breaking down your muscle proteins. This is where talking to a sports dietitian can be really helpful if you're trying to maximize your athletic performance. But I think what we're learning is that a lot of like old school ideas about how to be like a best gymnast, a best runner, a best skater, and kind of the idea of best was equated with skinny. That doesn't hold true. Best can mean strongest, which can mean at the right weight for you to perform optimally athletically. So if you are trying to maximize your athletic performance, I would really recommend talking to a sports dietitian. Sorry, that was a segue, or that was a tangent, but it was really important because I think athletes take this class so they can learn more about nutrition to apply it to their own selves, and it's just so important that you don't over-restrict your intake. If you're an athlete, you're doing really hard work and you need to fuel yourself. Same with all of us, honestly. Like, we're all humans in the world, we're humans dealing with stressors, and we need to fuel ourselves. The third thing that can happen if you're not eating enough protein is that your systems are just not going to end up working very well. So like children are going to have really slow growth, you could have brain and kidney impairment, you could have immune system impairment. All right, three more things I want to talk about to wrap up protein. The first is supplementation. Protein supplements are really popular, but do you need them? I would show you one, but I don't have any because I've never used them. So I don't personally use protein supplements, but I know people that do, and certainly to each their own. If you want to use them in a safe way, you can. There are many different kinds, all with pros and cons, but most people are going to get enough protein in their diet, and that's really the best way to consume protein is through your diet. If you want to use a supplement, I would recommend talking to a dietitian so that they can recommend the right supplement for you and the right dose of it for you, so that you're not getting too much of any particular amino acids or protein overall. So supplements, I'm also linking a really great video on supplements down below in the comments, so you can check that out too. Second thing I want to talk about is gluten. So you might have wondered why I didn't talk about gluten in the carbohydrate section, because generally gluten is found in carbohydrate-rich foods. Gluten actually is a protein, and it's a protein in wheat, rye, and barley. And gluten has become really hot lately because it became part of a fad diet craze where people would stop eating foods that had a lot of gluten in them to try to lose weight. Now, if you stop eating foods with, for example, wheat in them, you're going to stop eating a lot of different foods. And so you just restrict yourself, and that's why you lose weight. There's nothing really like special about not eating gluten. But now there's a proliferation of all these gluten-free substitute foods. So you can still eat bread, crackers, cookies, cake that are gluten-free. And I think that that's kind of undermining the gluten-free diet because there's not as much total restriction of the food groups you can eat. The proliferation of gluten-free food is really great for one group of people, and that's people with celiac disease. And celiac disease is an autoimmune condition where you have a reaction in your small intestine primarily to gluten. So instead of digesting the protein and living a happy symbiotic life with gluten, people that have celiac disease have an immune reaction. So they identify gluten as like an invader, and then they attack it, but they also attack their small intestine, so they can have damage throughout their intestinal system. And it's pretty serious because it can lead to long-term health effects if you continue to eat gluten and you have this issue. It also is problematic because it can cause you in the moment just digestive distress, along with other things that you might not even think are associated with a digestive issue like anxiety, sleeplessness, irritation. There are so many various symptoms of celiac disease that actually most people with celiac go undiagnosed, but we also have this whole other segment of people who think they have celiac and just don't have it. My brother has celiac disease, so I'm a little bit familiar with celiac disease and also the effort that it takes to eat a gluten-free diet, because the only treatment for celiac disease is to eat a gluten-free diet, which is not that simple because gluten is found in many foods that you wouldn't even expect it. Things like sauces, soy sauce, dressings, toothpaste even can all have gluten. And if you're going to have celiac disease, you also need to have like a completely gluten-free kitchen, gluten-free utensils, cookingware. All of that is really essential so that you're not getting cross-contaminated with gluten at any time. So if you have celiac disease, you definitely need to follow a gluten-free diet. But for everybody else, we can really all be eating gluten. In fact, eating foods that have gluten in them can give us more nutrition than eating the gluten-free substitutes. And that's because of the ingredients that are used. So like in a whole wheat bread, you have the whole wheat, which gives you a lot of fiber, some protein, and some vitamins and minerals. The gluten-free substitutes for bread are often made with things like tapioca starch, potato starch, rice flour, and other grains that are much lower in fiber and don't have the same micronutrients. So it shouldn't really seem, it's great that these foods exist for people that have celiac disease, but it's not necessary for the rest of us to be eating them. Okay? Makes sense? There's also people that have like a wheat allergy or a gluten allergy, and those people might feel better if they don't eat gluten, but again, most people do not have that issue. People that think that they have an issue when they eat like bread or other wheat products might actually be having a reaction to some of the chemicals that are used in producing a lot of the wheat-based products in this country. And so for them, sometimes eating organic wheat products can be helpful. This is all really under study still. Even celiac disease, they're still looking for another cure besides having to adhere to a gluten-free diet. So there's a lot of research ongoing, but I want you all to know that you can eat gluten and be healthy unless you have celiac disease. big question that I get a lot is whether you should be a vegetarian or a vegan to be healthiest. And I think that there's multiple ways to look at this question, but nutritionally, no, you don't need to be a vegetarian or a vegan to be super healthy, but you can absolutely be healthy being a vegetarian and a vegan. And you can get enough protein eating in either of those styles to be a happy, healthy human. There is some research that associates vegetarianism with lower rates of disease and lower rates of death. The same associations haven't been as prevalent for vegans, but of course there's anecdotes of people that have changed their whole life by going vegan, like good for them. But for everybody else, we don't have to be vegan to be healthy. There's also a lot of limitations for any of this research associating certain eating patterns with health outcomes. If you go back to video 1, we talk about the issues with nutrition research, and a lot of these are prevalent here. So let's think about a study that's looking at vegans, vegetarians, and then omnivores. Omnivores are people that eat everything. And they might find that there's a lower risk of disease with vegetarians and vegans, but they may not have asked the omnivores, like, how many fruits and vegetables do you eat? Do you eat whole grains? Do you eat low-fat meats? Do you eat high-fat meats? Do you eat dairy? Like, they might not have really gotten into what the omnivores are actually eating. So they group them all together, but there could be omnivores that are eating, meat 10 times a day, and then there's other omnivores that are in that category because they eat meat a few times a week. So we haven't really gotten to suss out like the differences of omnivoreness and whether it may be possible to eat like some dairy and some meat and still have the same outcomes as the vegetarians. So we need a lot more research on this. And what I would say is that it's probably not a bad idea to try to incorporate at least some vegetarian meals or some vegetarian days into your diet. And that can mean that you eat milk, it can mean that you eat eggs. Vegetarianism is much more liberal than veganism, but trying to kind of reduce our meat intake can be good for the environment, and it can be good for our health too. Personally, I think that that is true. Now, take it or leave it, that's just like one dietitian's opinion, and totally respect if you want to eat meat at every meal, totally respect if you don't want to eat meat at all. In fact, veganism, I'm just like, wow, that seems really, really hard, but probably because of my like intense love of dairy products. But I know that many people like to eat foods that would easily fall into a vegan diet and like to each their own. I think we have license to do that. But in terms of protein, you can absolutely get enough protein on either vegetarian or vegan diet, so that should not be a concern for anybody that wants to eat in those ways. All right. I think we have made it through protein, which marks the end, kaput, of our macronutrient segments. So we are now going to switch to the micronutrients, which are our minerals and our vitamins, and we will pick up with those next time, coming for the little guys. Bye.